So, we heard some of the challenging visions this morning in terms of how to achieve safe and sustainable food packaging. You've now had a whole group discussion on many different aspects, and I'm sure you've been confronted with the same challenges on how do we achieve safe and sustainable food packaging. And now we're going to try and see how do we start putting this into action, into practice, into policy as well. And our first guest for this session is joining us online. Malte Gallée, he is member of the European Parliament. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Malte, you will be telling us a little bit about how to integrate science into policy and how is the EU trying to do that. Malte, over to you if you can hear me. All well?
I can hear you. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I greet you. I'm from Madrid, from Spain. I'm sorry that I can't be there in person. Would have loved to, but we currently have a big meeting here as the Green Group to structure for the last months of the mandate. As you know, next year in June 2024, the European elections, and of course, for us as a group, it's really important to be ready to implement good policies also in the last months. And so this is why I can only be there online. So yeah, exactly as you said, I want to talk to you about the question of the importance of science in the EU policy making. But let me maybe first start with how the EU in general actually works. You know, we have like the three big institutions. We have the Commission, which is like the government of the European Union. Then we got the Council, which is like the representation of the member states. And we get us, the members of the parliament. We got the parliament who really represent the European people in the end. And if a policy is made, there is the right of initiative with the European Commission. So these are those who basically only start with the legislative process. They come up with the very first draft, and then they give this draft to us, to the parliament, and to the council, and then we will work on it, and they will work on it. And the European Commission, before they publish a new law, usually they always do the so-called impact assessments. So they have a lot of scientists who basically do research on what consequences the legislation would have in what scenario. So often they go for like what would a really progressive version of the law mean versus what would rather conservative version of the law mean. And so basically these impact assessments, they are like like a tool to gather evidence for the problem that we want to address with the whole law, of course. So this means the Commission, they have a lot of resources to really invest in research as well. And for us on parliamentary side, for example, we have to admit we do not have the same amount of resources to do our own research. So we also rely a lot on the impact assessments of the Commission, and we rely a lot on the findings of the Commission. And of course, we also rely a lot on the general, let's call it lobbying, and the input of many different stakeholders. So, and this is basically where science for us is most important. So, because basically we rely on research from other inputs, basically, and for us it's really tricky because often, you know, there is not so much evidence, and there are different different results of studies, for example. And then it's really hard for us to basically say, okay, this is what science says, so we will follow this because this is what we usually do. And in general, in the European Union, we follow the so-called precautionary principle, which means in our legislation, we want to make sure that there is no harm coming from the legislation that we do. But for example, sometimes it's hard to follow this precautionary principle because the Commission tends to be rather conservative in this. So this means they don't follow really precautionary principle, but they only follow if there's clear evidence that something is harmful. And often there is no clear evidence whether something is harmful. So if we look at problems like bisphenol A, for example, it took quite a while for the European research centers to say, okay, we really now have the proof that this is a risk to health, and then the Commission really acted. But for many other examples, like example, the glyphosate extension right now, or asbestos in general, these are topics that where we lack the clear evidence, and this is why we cannot really, or why we do not really act according to the precautionary principle. So as I said, like the bisphenol A, for example, the ban of the bisphenol A, this is, for example, a positive example of how this works. Like the European Food Safety Association, they like came up with these results, and then after like 2 years, over implemented acts, the Commission forbid them. So this is also where we as Parliament are excluded. So because if there is clear evidence for something, it's not a political question anymore. But for example, if we look at the current legislation on packaging, I mean, like what you and what we are talking about today as well a lot, the packaging and packaging waste regulation, where we come up with rules for the whole packaging sector. There, for example, in many areas, we experience that big corporates, they come up with life cycle assessments and studies to show that, yeah, their product, that their packaging is like has the best environmental performance, and to basically also conquer the reusable options. And often these kinds of life cycle assessments, they don't really show their methodology, and there's no standardized or they're not really standardized or robust enough. And this, for example, is for us really hard to then see, okay, what is actually good science that is brought to us, and what is like, yeah, not so good science. So, for example, I don't know if you followed this, but the McDonald's, for example, they run a campaign called the No Silver Bullet, which aims to deliberately mislead us policymakers into thinking that reusable packaging is not a viable solution in the whole packaging crisis. And yeah, basically, as an outcome, such campaigns allow for far more conservative political forces, so those that align themselves with the industry, to avoid making decisions that could result in actual change and more sustainable production patterns. So let me maybe end with also a demand towards you, or how I think we could make sure that good evidence is influencing our European legislation. As I said, we are facing huge lobbyism in the whole food packaging sector, and there are a lot of life cycle assessments where we do not really know whether they are really good or whether they just try to favor one special industry. So to ask you how to basically make sure that good research is provided to us, we need science to also contribute and also to criticize and to call out these kinds of wrong legislation, of wrong life cycle assessments, or of not balanced life cycle assessments, and of not balanced studies, to really show, okay, you see here we have better proof, and to also reach out to us policymakers so that we in the end can rely on really good and understandable and consequent data as well. So yeah, this is, I guess, a bit of an overview of how how we deal with the science in the EU policy, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion with you.
Okay, great, Malte. Thank you so much. A round of applause. Sadly, it seems that you have to deal with more bad science than good science, it seems, in EU policy making. Is that correct? You seem to be more exposed to the bad science than the good science. Is that a fair assessment?
I would totally agree, indeed, since I mean, like, the whole packaging industry is like 370 billion euros per year in the EU. So you can imagine there are quite some companies who have quite some interest of not changing and of like showing that, oh, actually the status quo is the best we have already, and then also like try to target different kinds of groups with different kinds of messaging. Like, for example, me as a green policymaker, you can imagine they mostly come up, like lobbyists come to me and tell me like that they have the most sustainable solution with the lowest CO2 footprint, and with the lowest environmental impacts. And yeah, so I guess for every different group, there are also different kinds of lobbyists and of studies. I can't believe that abroad to the conservatives, rather like looking at the economic impacts of decisions. So yeah, it would be a good thing to screen what is actually brought to us study-wise.
Yeah, maybe looking for this kind of independence of science, as opposed to a science that is there to confirm certain desired results, maybe, if I may put it that way. Okay, thank you so much, Malte. I know that you have a busy schedule, but it was great to be able to hear that perspective from the Parliament. You're currently negotiating the whole packaging and packaging waste regulation. So good luck for the last few moments of that.